Hi, I'm a jumping spider and I'm super excited today because Robin is going to shoot my portrait. Let's do this! Hi, my name is Robin Wong. I'm a photographer based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I love macro photography. I love shooting insects, bugs, and spiders. Usually, I will go out to a nearby park, find any bush, or even enter a forest just to look for these tiny creatures and take macro photographs. Unfortunately, now I'm stuck in this tiny room because of the lockdown in Malaysia, and based on current Prime Minister's announcement, the lockdown is probably going to extend until the end of the year, probably until next year, I don't know. So I cannot go out to find these beautiful creatures, but there is these tiny jumping spiders I've seen roaming around in my room. So let's look for that spider. To shoot the macro images of the spider, I'm using the Olympus OMD EM1 Mark III. I attached the Olympus 60 f2.8 macro lens on the camera. The macro lens allows us to get really close to the spider. On top of the camera, I mount the FLM3 flash. This tiny flash helps us to trigger the external flash off camera. The wireless flash that I'm using is the FL50R. This flash has been with me for more than 10 years and refuses to die. And I'm firing this flash off camera wirelessly. Of course, you do not fire the flash directly. Always diffuse the flash. I have here a rectangular softbox. It doesn't matter what brand you use. As long as it is a softbox, you have a nice, soft, diffuse light. When it comes to camera settings, I'm keeping it really simple. I fix my ISO at 200. ISO 200 is the base native ISO for all Olympus OMD cameras. ISO 200 is going to give you the best possible image quality. You're going to get the best sharpness, best detail capture, best dynamic range, best noise control, and best color tonality. I highly suggest that for macro photography, you use ISO 200 because for macro, we want to reveal and capture as much fine details as possible, and ISO 200 is just going to give you the best results. For macro photography, I usually shoot with full manual mode. I adjust the shutter speed and aperture manually. For shutter speed, it depends on how much ambient light that I want to capture in my shot. If I'm shooting outdoor, I do want to capture a little bit of light in the background so that the image looks a little bit more natural. Then I will slow down the shutter speed to maybe 1/60th of a second, 1/80th. It depends on how much light I want to show in the image. If I want to kill off the ambient light, say that here in this tiny room, there's not much ambient light to work with anyway, then I will go straight to 1/200th or 1/250th of a second, the fastest sync with the flash, to kill off the ambient light and just use the main light from the flash. When it comes to aperture, it depends on how much depth of field that I want to capture. I wouldn't recommend you to shoot at wide open f2.8. That is just too shallow of a depth of field. Everything will be blurry. Maybe out of the 8 eyes of the spider, you can only see 1 or 2 eyes in focus. You don't want that. I would recommend starting from f4 or f5.6 and slowly narrow it down to maybe f8 or f9 if necessary to capture sufficient depth of field. When I say sufficient depth of field, I mean how much zone in focus. You want to see some of the fangs, the legs, the spider's eyes, and part of the body in focus rather than just a tiny bit, the eye and everything else is blur. I normally wouldn't go more than f10 or f11, then you'll see diffraction and the image will become softer. Normally I'll stop at f8 or f9, and usually even at full magnification at f8 or f9 with the Olympus 60mm lens, you already have enough zone in focus. When it comes to lighting, I'm using a wireless flash. I hold it with my left hand. This flash is fired off camera. I've talked about how to configure wireless flash with Olympus camera. I'll put the link to the video up here. Please check out the video for the full setup. I will not repeat it in this video. I will hold the camera and the macro lens with my right hand, and I'm shooting single-handedly, while with my left hand I'm holding the wireless flash, where I can position the light above the subject as close as possible and angle it slightly to the left or to the right depending on the position of the subject. I find this works best for me because sometimes the tiny creatures, they don't just stand on an ideal spot posing for you. Sometimes it's hiding underneath a leaf, inside a flower. So being able to move the light around and position it wherever I want it to be gives me a huge advantage. There are so many different ways of doing lighting for macro photography. Feel free to find the one that works best for you. I'm not saying that you have to hold the camera and the lens with one hand as well. I know that this is not easy and it's not something that everyone is willing to do. For most of the time, I'm shooting with autofocus. I rely on the Olympus OMD single autofocus to nail my macro shots. I will move the focusing point to the area where I want to be in sharp focus. I half press the shutter button and I quickly press the shutter button once the camera acquired focus. I find this to work really effectively. There are times, very rare occasions, where this will fail, especially in very dim light. If the spider or any bugs are hiding in the shadow where there's not enough contrast for the camera to work with, then the autofocus will have some difficulty. I will not hesitate to use manual focus if necessary, but for 95% of the time, autofocus works just fine. Remember to check your shots, and don't just take one shot, take many shots. Say out of the 5 shots, I'm sure 2 or 3 will be in perfect tech sharp focus, and do make sure that you have the shot in perfect focus, because for macro photography, even the slightest misfocus, the slightest out of focus will show in your photograph. It will not look nice. There are many ways to be creative when it comes to composition in macro photography. I will share 2 useful and practical tips. The first one, go as close as possible. What is the purpose of macro photography? You want to achieve as high magnification as possible. You want to reveal all these tiny, beautiful little details that the naked, normal human eye cannot see. In order to do that, you need to go really close, push the lens to its limit, and go as close as you can to the maximum magnification. Then you'll have an impactful macro photograph. I see this common mistake that a lot of people do. They take the photograph of the bug or insect from a distance, then they crop in. Of course, you don't get as much sharpness, you don't get as much little details. The image will not look as good in comparison to another image taken when you go really close and fill the frame with the subject that you are shooting. Now, tip number 2, go low. Go to the same eye level of the spider or insect or any bug that you are shooting. This allows your viewer to connect to the subject better, because you're not looking from the top. You're not looking down on the subject, you're actually looking at the same level as if you're talking or communicating, connecting to the insect that you are shooting. I shoot all my macro photographs in RAW. This is extremely important to me because I adjust my flash power manually. Therefore, there is a possibility of me overexposing or underexposing my shots. Shooting RAW allows me more flexibility in recovering shadow and highlight details without destroying the image during post-processing. Speaking of post-processing, I do minimal adjustments. I do minor tweaks to white balance, contrast, exposure, a little bit of highlight and shadow recovery, and that's it. I want to maintain the natural look. I want to have a pleasing and balanced output. The goal is to have the image to look as natural as possible. The biggest mistake I see a lot of newcomers to macro photography do is to over sharpen their image. They'll push the sharpening slider all the way and it creates a very fake, very ugly over sharpened output. Please don't do that. If you want to achieve more sharpness, then pay attention to your shooting technique. How do you handhold your camera? How do you achieve critical focus? How do you go as close as possible to your subject to reveal more details? That's more important and will give you more sharpness than artificially sharpening it in post-processing. That's all I have to share about how I shot the jumping spider in my room. Of course, I wish to do macro photography outdoor and find more variety of different bugs, insects, or other spiders with different colors and sizes to work with. But now I'm stuck in this room during lockdown and there is only one spider in my room and I don't want to have too many spiders in my room as well. I hope you found this beneficial and I do hope that you try doing macro photography if you have not already done so. If you found my sharing useful, please consider buying me a cup of coffee, or you can contribute directly to my PayPal. Links in the description below on how you can do that. Any small contribution goes a long way, will help me to continue making videos and publish them right here, and will definitely keep me alive as well. Please also like, subscribe, comment and share, and I'll definitely see you again in the next one. Until then, stay safe, take care, and go out and take some macro photographs if you can. Bye bye.